Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for coming to our side event. It's really nice to have you here. My name is James Thurlow. I'm the Director of Foresight and Policy Modeling at IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research. It's one of the centers inside the CGIAR. So, not yet. So, the focus of today's session is on advancing the COP28 Food System Declaration. And so I'm sure in having come to the Food and Agriculture Pavilion, you're all very much aware of the Food System Declaration from a couple of years ago. It really was a landmark. It really was a landmark moment when so many countries recognized the important role that agri-food systems are going to have to play in tackling the challenge of climate change. So not just helping countries adapt to the shocks that are caused by climate change, but also contributing to reducing emissions. So we know that agri-food systems, by some estimates, account for maybe even a third of all the global emissions. And so there is no pathway to a low-carbon future that does not involve some adjustments to the way in which we go about producing our food. And so today, I'm going to give a brief background about some work that we've been doing, supported by the UAE, who hosted COP28, to help countries move towards achieving the goals of the Food System Declaration. And there are many, it wasn't just a declaration, it was a set of actions that countries committed to. And there are two of them that I really want us to focus on today. The first is around integration. That as a result of the COP declaration, countries committed themselves to including agri-food systems more intensively inside their climate policies, inside their nationally determined contributions, their NDCs. So that's integration. But at the same time, they committed to greater coherence between climate policies and climate targets, and then other policies, national development plans, national budgets, getting climate actions into those budget documents. Because we know that climate commitments, climate actions, climate policies are meaningless if they don't get funded and implemented. And the idea was that greater coherence would increase the likelihood that climate actions are actually implemented. So we were running a program for 3 years, for a year, called Future Food Systems. This was the UAE-sponsored initiative. And we did two things in this Future Food Systems initiative. The first is that we developed a set of common products or analyses that we did to try and help bridge the gap between, say, ministries of environment, ministries of agriculture, ministries of planning and finance. And then we also did some country-specific analysis to particularly help countries integrate climate and agriculture into their nationally determined contributions. So we produced 3 analytical products across all the countries, the 12 countries, 12 plus 3, because the Gates Foundation was also a sponsor, the 12 countries where we were working. The first analytical product is what we called an agri-food system diagnostic. This was a way of measuring what a country's agri-food system looks like and how it's been changing over the last 2 decades. How has it been transforming? And you can see here some examples from the countries that are going to be represented on the panel in a minute. You can see just how much bigger the agri-food system is than just agriculture. So if you just look at primary agriculture, crops, livestock, forestry, and fisheries in Ethiopia, for example, it's about 38% of the economy. But once you add in all those downstream sectors, the processing, the trade, all the other food-related activities, the agri-food system is over half of Ethiopia's economy. And what this means then is that integrating agriculture into nationally determined contributions, climate policies, is going to require some coordination between a Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Industries and other ministries that have within their jurisdiction some of those downstream sectors in the food system. The second piece of analysis that we did was looking at which kinds of investments in the agri-food system are the most cost-effective in driving competing goals. So we know we're at COP, everyone is clearly in favor of climate goals, but we know that climate goals are just one of many goals, policy goals, that are competing with each other for scarce resources and political capital. And so here you can see just an example of some analysis we did for Ethiopia, looking at the cost effectiveness of different types of investments in the agri-food system. And this is just a ranking of cost effectiveness with the most cost-effective investments at the top. And what you can see is that a lot of the investments in Ethiopia that turned out to be the most cost-effective across a range of outcomes are actually off-farm investments in small-scale enterprises like processing and trade, right? But you can also see from the light green boxes that these are not the most effective at achieving climate goals, reducing emissions, increasing water efficiency, and so on. So this is what we're up against with our climate agenda, is that we are trying to make the case for climate action up against all the other competing needs that policies also have to address. And then finally, we know that ministries of finance are particularly worried about risks. And we are making the case that climate change is a major source of risk for many of the world's developing countries. But we also have been through a period in which we've had COVID-19, we've had a spike in world prices caused by conflict between Russia and Ukraine, spikes in fertilizer prices due to trade policies. These are immediate shocks that countries have been facing. And so in any given year, we know that poverty and food insecurity, hunger, can fluctuate year to year as a result of factors that are beyond the control of policy. And here is our attempt, and I'm not going to go into the complex way in which this is measured, but here is an attempt to estimate how much of that uncertainty that's affecting poverty year to year is driven by, say, domestic production shocks, most of which is climate-related, weather shocks, and how much is driven by world prices. And you can see amongst the poorer countries on the left-hand side of the figures, it is domestic production shocks that are the number one source of poverty variability year to year. But you can also see countries on the right-hand side that are actually far more exposed to world market shocks and so on. We have to recognize that it's not all about climate risks. We have to weigh them off against these other sources of risks. And if we don't do that, it becomes very difficult to build the case for policy coherence against other competing goals. So the good news is that's just some background on the competition that we face in the climate policy space, in the agriculture space, and in the broader development space. And the good news is we have a fantastic set of panelists, 4 panelists who I'm going to ask to come up to the front now to address some of these questions around integration and coherence. So our first panelist is Dr. Irwan Assad, who's from the Ministry of Environment in Indonesia. And he's the Director of Resource Mobilization for Climate Change, amongst other roles as well. Our second panelist is Sintayu Demersi Admasu from the Ministry of Agriculture in Ethiopia. She is the head of Food Security Coordination Office. Thank you very much for joining us. Our third panelist is Uname Gordon. Uname's been working with us on Belize, but actually she's the former Principal Director for Climate Change from the government of Jamaica, and she was just telling me that she's been to, was it every COP or most COPs since COP 6? Okay, so she has a very long experience and much to share with us today. And then finally, Mr. Rajan Thapa, who is coming from us from Nepal, Ministry of Forests and Environment. And he is the project manager for the Capacity Building Initiative for Transparency, which is actually linked to the World Wildlife Fund, who's just next door. But it's good that you're here and not there. Okay, so thank you very much to our panelists for coming. And there is a mic. I'm actually going to move the mic to this side, and I'll just pass it along. I'm going to start with you. So we have 2 rounds of questions, just to help you structure. The first round of questions is going to be for everyone, and we're going to focus in on integration. And so I have the same question for all 4 of you. And that is, we know that the Food System Declaration is calling for much better representation, integration of food systems inside nationally determined contributions. Many of you are in the negotiating rooms right now. You're seeing how well that is going. If I was to, we have a time pressure, of course. So if I was to ask you just It's not the mic. If I was to ask you to just identify maybe 2 areas where you think there has been the most progress, or the progress that you think is most significant in trying to achieve that goal of getting food systems into climate policy. So maybe I can start with you, everyone.
Thank you, James. Thank you, James, for this opportunity. So, yeah, I mean, long before the COP28, Indonesia already introduced the food system in our NDCs, in our national communication, and all of the documents related to climate change. Yeah, and then the last thing that, yeah, in the mitigation aspect, within the one of the AFOLO sectors, and for the adaptation is one of the pillar of the adaptation, including the food, water, health, infrastructure, and ecosystem. So the food system is not new into Indonesia. There are more than 280 million people that need to be fed. So it is, we embedded in our system, including we introduced number of government regulation, presidential regulation on that. And then the last thing that we have examples from this system that we conduct climate field systems that integrate the climate data complex of the climate data to the farmers in the field. There are now is more than 20,000 people involved within this training, and it's growing in the field. So that's the example that we conduct how to integrate the complex data system within our food or agri-food system.
Yeah. It's the same question, I think. Yeah. Thank you. You mentioned already some of the aspects on this regard. Ethiopia is already, I mean, have a food system transformation pathway. After COP28, we integrated the climate adaptation mitigation aspect. Some of them is already there from production to consumption level, because there is, across the food system, there are many value chains. So it's already embedded. But in terms of refining it, we embed again on 24 game-changing solution, so that, I mean, we are now progressing. So the 2 progressed activities that we have is 1, climate smart agriculture. It's already embedded. Most of the project is considered this, and we are in a scaling up status right now. The other is the forest land coverage increase. That's also another thing that our Prime Minister is championed recently in Rome. The Green Legacy Initiative is the initiative that addresses this situation. And also we have a Grand Renaissance Dam. That's also another element to improve the climate mitigation and adaptation aspect. Thank you.
So, but before you pass on, can I ask a follow-up question, which is, you mentioned the Grand Renaissance Dam, which of course is a flagship investment in Ethiopia. What is the link to agri-food systems? I'm sure there are many.
Yeah, there are many. Even we are now looking at more fish from there. The forest cover around that also increasing. We have now seen clear water. Previously, because of the forest was not there, it's not clear water. So there are many aspects of, it. We are seeing a progress in terms of even using for small scale irrigation kind of, implementation. So it's coming because it's, recently launched. So we are seeing the developments in terms of food security issues and also land coverage increment. We'll update the next scope, I think.
It's an impressive investment. Una May, over to you to talk about Belize, if you can, but Caribbean more broadly, if you'd like to. Yeah.
So let me qualify. I'm Jamaican, do a lot of work in Belize, but thank you so much for just inviting me to be on this panel. I think I'll take a different angle because I think one of the things that we are seeing, and let me just qualify that progress has been made since COP28, but even before countries were taking action. So I want to make that very clear. But one of the things that we saw speeding up since COP28 is that countries are now not only developing food security plans, they are the food and nutrition security plans which countries are developing. And this signals really that countries are now linking food and health and a clear recognition that there is need for healthy population and food and climate change and health is linked. And healthy population is important for economic development. And I think we see that kind of linkage taking place right across the region. So that I think that's number one. And the second transformation we see is the role of the private sector in agriculture, in the agri-food system. I think there is a clearer recognition that the private sector have a role, but also the private sector themselves recognizing that climate smart agriculture is important for their trade. Government does not trade. And therefore, climate smart agriculture, agri-food systems and so on, right along the chain is important for their production base to maintain their trade and their bottom line. And so we see that kind of transformation taking place right across the region, and more so in the countries where there is large-scale agriculture, and also where there is small-scale agriculture, like in Jamaica, where there are really many small farmers, but say 78% of those small farmers are involved in agribusiness. And therefore, that kind of integration you see taking place, health, agriculture, nutrition, private sector concerns right across. And I think that it spells good for the food systems approach.
Again, can I ask you a follow-up question? Sorry. So if you look, we've done this kind of food system analysis in in all the countries in the world really now. And one of the unique characteristics of small island states is just how important tourism is for the local food system. It almost dominates. And you mentioned private sector companies, and I'm wondering to what extent are you seeing these big international tourism companies, hotel chains, are they taking up the cause for climate change?
Well, let me go to both Belize and Jamaica. They have no choice, because when tourists come to the islands, they come for the experience in the islands. And so if you go into half of the hotels, large chains, there is always a Belize Day, a Jamaica Day, where there is just local food. People come for the food experience, and Jamaica is known as a country of food. That's what they come for. So that food chain, right along the economic chain, it becomes quite as important as anything else. And so the contribution of agriculture to the economic development of the entire economy, but more so to tourism, is also something that we are mapping right now.
No, thanks very much. And Rajan, over to you to speak about Nepal. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. My name is Rajan Thapa. So currently I'm leading this capacity building initiatives for transparency CBIT project in Nepal. So basically my role is to track the progress against NDC. So that's why I'm very much engaged in the NDC formulation process. But for this intervention, I'll just borrow the word that she has just mentioned about. So Nepal is also highly rely on the tourism, and also half of the populations are engaged in the agricultural system. So due to this climate change, both the sector are being highly affected. So one, we are losing our indigenous seeds. That is all the tourists they are looking for. Whenever they come to Nepal, they also look for the local food. And since we are graduating from like a local indigenous food to hybrid one. So we are also struggling to provide them those kind of local foods. That is one part. Second one is the farmers who are struggling hard. So annual basis, like they are losing a huge amount of food or the product they have yield due to the flood, landslide, or other climatic issues. So we are very in difficult situations to respond the need of farmers. So for me, like I think the need is to give some kind of capacity support to the farmers so that they could understand that this kind of change in climate, maybe like that could be in a means of this early warning system so that they could track how the climate or the weather is changing and when they should uh, plant or grow the paddy or other thing. At the meantime, it is also important to incentivize them through the insurance as well, like so that they could also at least they could minimize the climate risks through some other channel. And the third one is the climate smart technology. For that, we also equally need to invite other private sector to engage because solely like if we just provide them some kind of technological support and awareness campaign, it doesn't work. So for that, we need to have a private sector to work with them, not a private sector just to provide them seats or other means of support, but a private sector in a means of financial support, the banks or the insurance companies, so that they could also minimize their climate risks and vulnerabilities. So that is the things that we have integrated in our NDC as well, because like integrating targets or the things doesn't work sometimes. So to enhance the targets or the ambition, it is also equally important for us to respond the voice of farmers as well, because they are the one who are growing the food. And as you see, like our more than half of GDP is depend on the agriculture. So it is real need for them to provide the supports and incentives as well. Yeah, hi, here stop.
So if I can ask you a leading question into the next round of questions,
Yeah.
but if I can ask you, thank you very much. You mentioned farmer-facing interventions, you mentioned finance and so on. Coming from the Ministry of Environment, to what extent do you feel you have that jurisdiction to drive those kinds of necessary investments in agriculture and finance and so on? Is this a, yeah?
So I think it's not only a challenge of Nepal, because like it's all the developing nations, like because and Nepal, it belongs to LDC. So we are really struggling to get the financial support. But from the government point of view, like we are trying to like quantify the targets, like where we can mobilize our domestic finance. And but at the meantime, we are also like partnering with the other development agencies as well. Like for the example, in Nepal, like we are working together with the FAO and other like-minded institutions, like who could provide a financial support or the technical support to the ministry. And on the other hand, like since climate change, like it falls under the Ministry of Forest and Environment, and we have a separate Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development, who look after the agriculture thing. So we are trying to bring both the ministry in a one table, and not only the two ministry, but in Nepal, like we have a kind of mechanism that inter-ministerial coordination committee on climate change, like where all the ministry representatives are invited to be a part of that committee and work together. So from that coordinated way that we are trying to identify the proper solutions. But finance, like if you look at to the current NDC 3.0, like we have both conditional and unconditional targets. So in the unconditional target, like we aiming to mobilize the total out of total 14% of domestic fund, and majority of percentage is allocated to, one is for energy and second one is for agriculture food. So that's how we are working. But since I'm not only representing ministry, so sometimes it's difficult for me to answer your question. So yeah.
Well, thank you for trying. It was a difficult question. It's actually a question very similar to what I'm in the second round around coherence. I'm going to ask Dr. Irawan. We know the Food System Declaration is calling for greater coherence. And you're coming from a Ministry of Environment perspective. So a somewhat similar question to Rajan.
Yeah.
Do you see any differences in goals and priorities across the different ministries, goals and differences in tensions, even competition?
Yeah.
You know, if you're seeing these tensions, any advice on how we can bridge the gap?
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, I don't want to call it tension. Just call it challenge, because it's challenge between us. Yeah, every minister have their own KIP that they have to achieve. So in this case for agriculture sectors, yeah, in Indonesia the agriculture sectors falls under the Ministry of Agriculture. So Minister of Environment. So we have in the climate section that we need to collaborate all of them. There are more than 20 ministers that involved under the climate change. Yeah, you name it, from the energy, from the finance, environment, forestry, under the agriculture. So in Indonesia, we call it Friends of NDC. So all of these ministers join together. They are meeting 6 to 6 months, every 6 months or every year. To formulate what is or to measure the achievement of our NDCs. And it is, although this is like a high level meeting, but it is working in Indonesia. And then we also back up with the because we have a presidential regulation that mandated all of these ministers join together to tackle the climate change. And then I think the political approach like this one is one of the approach, because yeah, we cannot work together to solve the climate change problems. Yeah, although the Minister of Environment responsible to manage it, to manage the ministry, but for example for agriculture, it is involved number of sectors. Yeah, irrigation, farmers, and etc. So that's why that we in Indonesia we need to we develop a strong coordination and develop the regulation for that, and it's working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's very positive.
Yeah.
Maybe I can ask Sintayo if you have a similar question, but asked in maybe a different way, which is we know in Ethiopia, agriculture, livestock, these are really important sectors, not just for addressing climate change like livestock, but also for people's livelihoods and some of the poorest people in Ethiopia. And so I guess a question I have for you is, in your work from the Ministry of Agriculture, do you see amongst your colleagues, maybe even within the ministry, some tensions around what the core role of the ministry is? Is it food and or is it climate change? From your position in the Food Security Coordination Group, what do you think? And is there a role for evidence? Maybe some of the stuff that I showed, but other evidence that you think could maybe smooth over some of this potential competition amongst goals? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I think the best example is the Productive Safety Net Program, which I am leading. 8 million beneficiaries. They are poor and vulnerable to climate shock. So most of the time, we are dealing with their food gap, to smoothen their food gap, as well as we are asking the climate change adaptation mitigation aspect. So they will have an entitlement to smoothen the 6 months food gap, but they should contribute also to rehabilitate the environment. So in terms of acceptance, they are very, they accept it and they are working. But in terms of the sector, there is always a competition. You know, we are allocating budget to improve their livelihoods. We are also allocating different budgets, like to build small-scale irrigation and also to work on soil and water conservation. So there are many sectors in this program to have, ask the budget to be allocated on yearly basis. So it's been a fight, but we are working like in an integrated manner. We are giving weight to the activities that we prioritize. so that we will end up like interlinked and also integrating the activities that we have. So in terms of competition, there is always competition, but you should prioritize and also interlink the activities. It's about a short-term aspect and also long-term aspect. If you I mean think of climate aspects, it's a long-term, so that the short-term should be done wisely by compromising. The long-term should also be considered. So it's about balancing the ask. Otherwise, it's very difficult, because some of the activities will be naturally manage the integration and also the interlinked kind of thing. So with that, we manage most of the allegations come to the program. Thank you.
No, thanks. I think that short versus long term is the real challenge, and often the short term wins the day, right? So this is a real challenge for all of us. I might come back later, Irawan, to ask you a similar question about land use change as well. Uname, thinking about small island states more broadly, we know they have their own unique challenges for climate change, which I think many of us probably know a lot about. And so there's a lot of really tough decisions that small island states have to make. But unfortunately, many of these small countries don't have the big evidence bases, the data that is needed to inform those decisions. And so given that you've been working on climate change since COP6 and working closely in government, what would you say some of the biggest evidence gaps are that are holding us back? And yeah, from your experience, please.
So let me start at the end and then I'll go back to the beginning, because I think the biggest challenge that there is data, but the quality of the data, there is a real challenge with the quality of the data. And there is a lack of capacity, I think, to forecast these demands so that the ministry and the Minister of Agriculture can then take that to cabinet and get the resources that is required. But also that there is clear understanding that climate change is affecting the food systems. But then you have an agriculture policy, you have a climate change policy. So there is no coordinated evidence and policy that will put it all together. And then you have a food and nutrition security policy, and you have a livestock policy. And within some of those policies, there's also policy conflict. And so while we talk about the coherence, there is also these conflicts within some of these policies. So there is a lack of coordination among the ministries, the departments, the agencies, and even within and between the ministries, the same ministries, there is also that. So the quality of the data that comes out, which is leading to the same result, is part of that problem. I think if we move to the second part, then I think one of the things that we should look forward to advance the agenda is standardization of data. How do we get standardization? The NDC process is owned by the climate change ministry and the climate change people. The agriculture policy and the agriculture framework is owned by, and sometimes there are no meeting of the minds. Fortunately for us this year, Belize was able to have a meeting of the minds, and you will look to the Belize NDC, which was submitted earlier this year. For the first time, I think it's one of the few countries in the region that has agriculture represented in the NDC, and I think we'll get further there. And the foresighting workshop, which you mentioned earlier that we had in Belize, while we started the process and did not use the methodology to develop the NDC because we were already there, but what it did is cast the agriculture sector into the future so that they can understand what that means. So you will see a stronger representation of agriculture in some of the countries, in some of the NDCs of the countries, because of what we actually did in Belize. But really, there is data.
Yeah.
The quality of the data is really what is really a problem. And there's no central repository in any of the countries to cleanse this data and standardize it. I think that's bad. And so if there's no data for decision making, then anything goes. And it's whichever of the ministry has the loudest voice and the strongest links will get the resources.
No, I think that's a very good point. There's nothing worse than having lots of data but lots of opinions. What you want is a same consensus. So I very much take that. And maybe we'll come back to talk about that foresighting workshop in a second. Rajan, if I can ask you to talk about the NDC process. We know Nepal has a very ambitious NDC. It's not just energy. There's a very ambitious transport sector switching to electric vehicles, very ambitious. And I'm just wondering, you know, during the end, and of course, an ambitious agriculture, agri-food system agenda as well. And so I'm just wondering, as you were preparing the NDC and you were looking at these different sectors side by side, or maybe in isolation, this is one of the questions. You know, what kind of analysis did you do? We saw how much of the food system is in the trade and transport sectors. What kind of analysis did you draw on to bring these sectors together for a coherent strategy to address climate change? And then also, did you think about the impacts on the broader economy, not just on emissions and so on? Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you. So, like when we started developing this NDC 3.0, at the meantime, like we were also like working on our first BTR report, biennial transparency report. So while preparing biennial transparency report, at that time we realized that our NDC target should be quantifiable, so that in later stage we should report back those targets to the UNFCCC in a quantifiable manner. So that actually motivated us to go through all the 4 thematic area, especially AFLU, energy, IPPU, and waste. So while identifying the target, we actually went through the number of models, modelings, cost benefit analysis, and especially for the agro-food system, we did climate change vulnerability and a risk assessment. And from the government of Nepal, actually, we adopted approach like whole of the government, whole of the society, so that in the later stage, all the civil society organization and other government institute, they should also want it, and they should also work that by the end of 2035, Nepal should achieve those targets. So that was the primary mission for us. And during the formulation process, we also went through series of consultation workshops, not at only on the national level, but also in the provincial and also in the local level, because the involvement of all government from all 3 tiers is equally important. Because sometimes people, they think that a NDC, it's a national document and only the national government should take care of it. But if we, unless and until if we don't engage the local government or the provincial government, it cannot be fulfilled. So that was the vision that government of Nepal we took forward, and we engaged all the government institutions, policymakers, and even the civil society organization in this process. And in 2020, we did nationwide climate change risks and vulnerability study. And in Nepal, we have a 77 district, and out of 77 district, more than 50% of districts, they fall in high to very highly vulnerable. So that also provided some scientific evidence for us to set the targets. So I would say that whatever the target that we have identified is more scientific, robust, and to make it robust, we have engaged academicians who has a huge experience in analyzing the data and the evidences. And at the meantime, we also engage the policymakers, because the policymakers are the one who see whether there is similar policy or not. So in our NDC, it's not only one document, it is the coherence between other policy document as well. If you look at to the Nepal's a action plan on agro-food system, the current NDC has actually it also adopted those targets in the NDC. So that kind of coherence and synergies you can find in the NDC. So that was
just one central question. What would you like the agriculture sector to look like in 10 years? And therefore, all get together, lots of discussions, and just to look at the priorities. So at the end of that session, all the members in that room agreed that these would be the priorities casting forward into the future, which was a really good exercise. It was a 2-day exercise. And at the end of it, there was general agreement. The conflicts that we saw at the beginning were almost dissipated when we got to the end. And so that foresight question, central question, was answered. But I wanted to go back to a question you asked about where do we see agriculture? Because I think we have to look more to the technology that is available to us and the innovation that is available to us, and to remember that land itself, which is what we know as one of the products of agriculture, is really a finite resource. There is no more land, and we are losing land because of climate change. And therefore, how do we use technology, use innovation, and maintain the livelihoods, especially in developing countries, of the small farmers that depend on agriculture? I think that's also one of the questions that we need answered. Moving them up the value chain so that they can maintain their livelihood while benefiting longer and more from the sector. Some of them don't know anything else more than being in agriculture. And I think that's a discussion for the food systems discussion that we're having.
Thanks, Uname, and very cunning of you to mention the importance of technology in the CGIAR tent. We are a big provider of those technologies. Rajan, if I could turn to you. So you heard from Uname, very much a participatory approach, scenario building. My understanding in Nepal is that it was a lot more quantitative and so on. And you mentioned, I think you said 70 different local governments in Nepal. And I'm wondering, how did you bring along all of the local governments in setting these NDC targets? What was the process? And not to push you in any direction, but I could imagine with so many local governments, a more participatory approach could work. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on sort of the approach to engage different stakeholders with different targets and in different processes.
Hello. So like in terms of identifying the NDC targets, like as I already mentioned, like it is always important to see that like this document should won by each and every government entity and also the non-government entity, because it's ultimately it's a nation goal. Like we have to achieve that by the end. So as a participatory approach, like at a national level, we organize a thematic or sectoral discussion or the consultation, you can say. And after having a sectoral consultation, like a 8 sectoral consultation, then we prepared a draft targets, and we went to the provincial level. So in province, like we organized 7 provincial discussion, like where we invited all the province government and also the representatives from the local government as well. So for the local government, they were responsible to bring the local issues. Like if the national government, they have like put some target and which cannot be achievable, or that is not realistic in the local level, then it cannot be accommodated in the document. So that was the kind of vision by the government. So we invited the local government as well as a provincial government in the provincial discussion. And once we finalized the document, then we circulated it for the people who could like provide their insights, comments, or feedback to that document. And after receiving those feedbacks and comment, then we incorporated all those valid comments. And then finally, this document was endorsed by our cabinet. So you can see that like it's a very process oriented, or you have or very much intense engagement of all the sectors in this process. So we have a aim that like since now like in the current stage, like we are developing our NDC implementation plan. And in the NDC implementation plan as well, like we are doing the similar kind of approach. And our like a kind of aim is that like every sector or every individual government or government's entities, they should take it forward and include those plan into their annual plan and policies so that it could be integrated in their annual budget and plan. And by the next 5-10 years, the target could be achievable. So that's how we are working. And in the case of monitoring, like it is always important to see like whether those target has been achieved or not. So now we are trying to develop like NDC implementation tracking system as well. So recently we have endorsed our measurement, reporting, and verification MRV mechanism. And for agro-food system, like we have a separate MRV. So, and we have also envisioned a separate institutional mechanism who will look after like how the NDC is progressing, like whether we are on track or not. So like that kind of synergy or bringing all those stakeholders in one table is always beneficial to shared goal, shared mission, and so that like by the end we could achieve our goal. Yeah.
With such extensive processes, it's a miracle the NDCs ever get finished. So it's wonderful to hear. I wonder if there are any questions from the floor for the panelists. Does anyone have anything they would like to ask or? No pressure. Oh, sorry. Yes.
First off, just thank you. That was a really excellent panel, and it was really great to hear from you all. I have a question. Oh, sorry. I have a question mainly about small island nations and how extreme weather, like the devastating events that just happened in Jamaica, might maybe shift to a more globalized food system, which, as we know, has a larger environmental impact. And kind of related to that, how do you think that the role of culture plays in the development of agricultural systems, as well as economic and agriculture and social development?
Thanks, Uname. Did you hear the questions? Yes, perfect.
So here I just wrote down when I talk about technology and innovation, if you look in my notes here, I have beside it indigenous knowledge. Because so let me go back then to the first part of the question about the global food system. 90% of the agriculture, especially in the Caribbean, are small farmers. And therefore, the contribution to their livelihood from agriculture is significant. They have to be restored and recovered after every impact. It is a significant burden on the national budget and the debt burden, but it will not change unless we move to large-scale agriculture, which I don't see happening right now. And so the impact of Melissa in Jamaica, the entire parish, which provides 60% of the food in Jamaica, was destroyed. It was ground zero for Melissa. But that's the parish that has to be restored first. And so if you go to St. Elizabeth next week, you will see the farmers at work, because it is linked to the livelihood of the population, but it is also linked to the health of the population. And I think that's what I spoke about the seeming linkage that we are seeing and the circularity which we are seeing within the agri-food system and the contribution of agriculture to national development. So that's there. I don't see that changing. There is an import that will have to happen, like eggs, for example, which is important to nursing mothers, which is a protein source, but there will always be a cap for imports, and that happens in most of the countries. The role of culture, food is a part of the culture of small island developing states. People come, as I said, for the food, and therefore if you lose the food, you lose a huge part of the culture. And as I like to say in every panel I do on agriculture, we do agriculture 3 times a day, every day of our lives. Morning, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We do agriculture 3 times a day. It will not change for a while.
Thank you very much for your question. I think we're actually out of time and we're being competed with the rain. Let me just say, maybe we can say thank you very much to our panelists. Let me just close by obviously saying thank you very much. That was fantastic. And I really appreciate you taking the time out of the busy discussions that are going on to join us here. Where are we going with the Future Food System Project? And we're busy initiative and we're busy working with many people in the countries. Here you can, if you want to learn more about some of that evidence that I talked about, please feel free to take a look at the web link in that QR code. Our big plan for the next 6 months is to take all these fancy models and all the lessons learned and all the country cases that we've been working on and compile a big consolidated volume that brings those lessons together. And so please look out for that. And then secondly, we're working with Bapanas, with Ministry of Environment and so on, and with other countries, Ministry of Agriculture and so on, to make sure that some of these modeling tools that we have inside the CGIAR are transferred over. And so we're working with, for example, in Ethiopia, the Planning Commission to make sure their new modeling unit has all the tools. So this is very much the focus now going forward. It is not over because COP30 is almost over. The journey continues. And really, thank you very much for your insights and look forward to working with you again in the future. Thank you very much.